The morning sun climbed slowly over Ashworth Row, a winding street of brick colonials and stone facades tucked into the hills above Brentwood, Tennessee. It was the kind of neighborhood where silence had a texture to it, broken only by the hiss of automatic sprinklers and the occasional purr of a well-maintained German sedan pulling out of a three-car garage. Terence Okafor loved mornings like this. As the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration, his days were usually consumed by classified briefings, congressional testimony, and the grinding machinery of federal law enforcement. But before 8 a.m., before his secure phone started buzzing with the day's first crisis, he allowed himself this coffee going cold on the porch rail, a pair of garden shears in hand, and the low murmur of birdsong replacing the usual chorus of ringing phones. He was dressed for comfort, faded olive cargo shorts, a wine-red flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a pair of scuffed running shoes that had logged more miles on this driveway than any actual road. A Morehouse College sweatshirt hung over the porch chair, ready for when the morning chill wore off. At 56, Terence still carried himself like the field agent he'd once been, broad-shouldered, deliberate in his movements, with a close-cropped beard just beginning to silver at the edges. 2 streets over, a patrol cruiser rolled slowly through the neighborhood, its tires crunching over fallen leaves. Behind the wheel sat Officer Wade Kessler, a man in his late 20s whose ambition wildly outpaced his competence. Kessler had spent 3 years fishing for the kind of headline arrest that would fast-track him to detective, and every quiet shift in this precinct felt like an insult to his own self-image. Beside him, Officer Nate Cobb sipped from a thermos, half listening to the scanner, mostly counting down the days until his pension vested. Look at these houses, Kessler muttered, drumming his fingers on the wheel as they passed a row of manicured lawns. People out here don't even lock their doors. Makes it easy for someone to walk right in. Wade, Cobb said, not looking up from his coffee. Nothing happens on this street. Last call we got was somebody's pool alarm going off. Complacency gets you killed. Kessler recited, the line landing with all the drama of a man quoting a movie he'd seen once. As the cruiser rounded the bend near the cul-de-sac, Kessler's eyes narrowed. A figure stood at the edge of a long paved driveway, reaching into a brick mailbox, a tall black man in worn clothes, standing in front of a home easily worth $3.5 million. Something in Kessler's mind clicked into place, the way it always did, when the picture in front of him didn't match the picture in his head. What do we have here? He said, already easing the cruiser toward the curb. Cobb sighed. Wade, leave it. That's probably just the landscaper. But Kessler was already out of the car, one hand resting on his belt, boots crunching against the driveway with theatrical purpose. Terence heard the footsteps and turned, the morning paper tucked under one arm. He offered a neutral nod, the kind of practiced calm that came from 30 years of reading a room before it read him. Morning, officer. Step away from the mailbox. Kessler Barkel. No greeting. No preamble. Terence's eyebrows lifted a fraction. He recognized the posture instantly, the puffed chest, the itch for confrontation, dressed up as diligence. I live here, he said evenly. Just getting my paper. I need to see identification. I don't carry a wallet out to check the mail. Terence replied, it's inside. I'm happy to go get it. You're not going anywhere. Kessler's voice sharpened, closing the distance between them. Whose house is this? What's the owner's name? The owner's name is Terence Okafor. He said simply, that's me. Kessler let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Sure it is. Guy dressed like you. Owning a place like this. I know people who live on this street. You don't fit the profile. The profile. Terence let the phrase sit in the humid morning air for a moment before he spoke again, his tone still level. though something colder had settled behind his eyes. "Officer, I'd strongly suggest you reconsider this line of questioning. Check the plates on the SUV in the garage. Call it in. Don't tell me how to do my job." Kessler reached out and seized Terrence's wrist, twisting his arm behind his back. Terrence's muscles tensed on instinct, but decades of discipline overrode the reflex. He let it happen, dropping the newspaper onto the pavement. Cobb jogged up the driveway, alarm written across his face. "Wade, hey." He's not resisting. He's refusing to identify himself on private property he claims to own. Kessler snapped, pulling handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked shut, tight against Terrence's wrists. Terrence stood perfectly still, meeting Kessler's eyes without a trace of fear. "Officer," he said quietly, "I won't resist you. But I'll say this, once you are making a catastrophic error, take these cuffs off, and we can both walk away from this." Kessler smirked, shoving him toward the cruiser. "Save it for booking." The back seat of the patrol car smelled like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Terrence sat rigid, his shoulders forced forward by the cuffs, watching the back of Kessler's head with the same clinical detachment he'd once used to size up cartel lieutenants and money launderers. He wasn't angry. Anger was a wasted emotion in a moment like this. What he felt instead was something closer to disappointment. He'd spent half his career trying to reform the very system currently hauling him downtown in his own driveway. He catalogued the violations mentally, the way he always did. No probable cause, no Miranda warning, excessive force, no attempt to verify identity before an arrest. Up front, Kessler was practically glowing. "This is how you keep a neighborhood clean." "Nutty," he said. Guy couldn't even keep his story straight. Said he owned the place. No ID on him. Probably casing it while the real owners are at church. Cobb said nothing, stealing glances at the man in the back seat through the rearview mirror. Something about his stillness unsettled him. Real suspects yelled, bargained, cried. This man sat like he was the one running the show. "Did you even call it in?" Cobb asked quietly. "Don't need to." Caught him red-handed. Terrence closed his eyes and began composing, in his mind, the exact wording of the call he needed to make to Victor Lang, his deputy administrator, the one man who could mobilize the entire machinery of the federal government within the hour. He decided against revealing his identity too early. Better to let this play out somewhere it would be recorded. The cruiser pulled into the rear lot of the Brentwood Hills precinct, a squat brick building that had clearly been standing since disco was still popular. Kessler yanked Terrence out by the arm, shoving him toward the steel doors. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over a scattering of Tuesday morning officers nursing coffee and complaining about shift changes. At the booking desk sat Sergeant Renata Cole, a weathered 20-year veteran with tired eyes and an unimpressed set to her jaw. "Look what wandered in," Kessler announced. "Caught him snooping around a house on Ashworth Row. No ID. Claims he owns it." Cole looked Terrence over the flannel shirt, the cargo shorts, the calm, unreadable face. "No ID at all. Says it's inside the house." Kessler said, "Real convenient. Take the cuffs off." Cole said, "Empty his pockets." Kessler hesitated, then complied. Terrence brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists deliberately, making sure the red marks were visible to the desk camera. He placed a single brass key on the counter. Nothing else. No wallet. No phone. Kessler said, triumphant. "Who walks around with nothing? A man checking his own mailbox." Terrence said, looking directly at Cole, "Sergeant, your officer used force on me, on my own property. I'm requesting my phone call. And I'd suggest preserving the dashcam footage immediately." Cole's chewing slowed. There was something about the calm precision in his voice preserved the dashcam footage that didn't belong to the vocabulary of a burglar. "Give him the phone," she said softly. Kessler slid a heavy desk phone across the counter. Terence lifted the receiver and dialed 12 digits from memory, a secure line he knew better than his own house number. "Lang," a voice answered sharply. "Victor, it's Terence." A beat of silence. Then the voice snapped, fully awake. "Sir, you're on an open line. Is everything all right? I'm at the Brentwood Hills Police Precinct. I've been arrested." Terence kept his tone level. "Watching the room. Unlawful detainment. Excessive force. No Miranda. I need the regional response team assembled. Bring legal counsel. Bring inspection division." "Understood." "Sir, we're moving." He hung up the phone and looked at Kessler with the faintest, coldest smile. "He's on his way." Holding cell 5 smelled of bleach and years of quiet desperation. Kessler shoved Terence inside and slammed the bars shut with obvious satisfaction. "Get comfortable. Bond's going to run whoever you call a fortune. Burglary tools. Resisting. Trespassing. I'm stacking the whole sheet." Terence didn't bother correcting the fabricated charges. He simply turned, studying Kessler with unsettling calm. "Officer Kessler, do you have a retirement account?" Kessler blinked. "What, a pension?" But ribuan satka. Anything." Terence stepped closer to the bars, and though his voice never rose, the weight of it seemed to press the air out of the hallway. "I ask because by sundown, you're going to want to start exploring private sector employment. Assuming anyone hires a convicted felon, is that a threat?" "It's a fact," Terence said, and sat down on the metal bench, folding his hands in his lap, dismissing the officer from his attention entirely. Au fond. The room had changed. Sergeant Cole was no longer chewing gum. Her face had drained to a sickly grey as she stared at her monitor. The moment Kessler disappeared into the back, her instincts had screamed at her to check the county property database. She typed in the address, 14 Ashworth Row, owner Terence A. Okafor. Status paid in full. Assessed value $3. 4 millions. Her stomach dropped. She opened the federal criminal database next, and the screen flashed a yellow banner, restricted clearance, level 9 required. Hands trembling, she opened a browser and typed his name into a search engine. The first result was a government biography page, a formal portrait of a man in a navy suit. Dignified. Unmistakable. Administrator. Drug Enforcement Administration. Sarge Kessler called, strutting back into the room. "Guys making threats about federal charges in there. I'm adding terroristic threats to the sheet." Cole looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Wade, what have you done?" 30 miles away. In a secure office in Washington, Deputy Administrator Victor Lang was already moving. He didn't call the local police chief. He called Special Agent in charge Priya Anand, commander of the DEA's Regional Tactical Division. "The administrator has been unlawfully detained in Brentwood," Lang said, pulling a shoulder holster over his shirt. "Full tactical response. Now." "Understood. Sir." "We roll in 5. Back at the precinct." Cole was fumbling with the phone, trying to reach the chief of police, her hands shaking too badly to dial. Kessler leaned over her monitor and read the name on the screen. The blood left his face so fast Cobb thought he might faint. "No," Kessler whispered. "That's no." He was wearing a flannel shirt. He didn't look like what? Wade Cobb shouted, tossing his coffee cup into the trash, the full weight of the morning finally landing on him. "I told you to leave him alone." A low rumble began to vibrate through the floor, not the high whine of a siren, but the heavy synchronized growl of diesel engines. The front windows darkened as vehicles blocked out the sun. 6 matte black GMC Yukons screeched to a halt outside, forming a wall around the parked cruisers. Behind them, an armoured MRAP idled with quiet menace. Doors flew open. Nearly 30 tactical agents poured onto the street in full gear. Olive drab vests stamped DEA in bold letters. Rifles held low and ready. Snipers took position on the roof of the pharmacy across the street. They're surrounding the building. Kopfstammel. Hands rising instinctively. Everyone hands on the desk. Cole ordered, "Don't touch your weapons." The glass doors burst open. A dozen agents flooded the lobby, fanning out with brutal efficiency, securing every exit before anyone could speak. Through the corridor of armed agents strode Deputy Administrator Victor Lang, jacket unbuttoned, eyes burning. "I am Deputy Administrator Victor Lang of the Drug Enforcement Administration," he announced, his voice filling the room. "You are holding Administrator Terence Okafor. If he has been harmed in any way, everyone in this building will be looking at federal kidnapping charges. Cell 5. Cole stammered, pointing. He's unharmed. This was a mistake." Lang and Anand moved down the hallway, flanked by 4 agents, and found Terence exactly where they'd left him seated. Composed, unbothered. "Administrator. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." "Victor." Terence rose smoothly, brushing invisible dust from his flannel shirt. "Thank you for the prompt response." "What happened? What happened?" Terence said, stepping out of the cell as agents parted to let him pass. "Is exactly why civil rights litigation against local departments exists. Let's go clear this up." Terence walked into the booking area, the room frozen around him. He stopped in front of Kessler, who now stood stripped of his weapon, his badge, his borrowed authority, nothing left but a frightened young man who'd finally picked a fight he couldn't win. "You didn't know," Terence said quietly. "That's the entire problem. Officer Kessler, you didn't know if I owned that house. You didn't know my name. You didn't ask for verification before you put hands on me. You saw a black man in worn clothes outside an expensive home, and your assumptions made every decision for you." He paused. "You do not own the law. We do. As of this moment, your career in law enforcement is finished." He turned to Lang. "Victor, get the Inspector General's office down here. I want every arrest Officer Kessler has made in the last 3 years audited. This whole precinct needs review." "Yes, Administrator." Terence looked at Kessler one final time. "You thought you were making a big bust today. You were right. You just made one on yourself." He turned and walked toward the doors, the sea of agents parting like water. Chief of Police Raymond Dutcher was on the 11th hole of the Brentwood Country Club when his phone began buzzing violently. He expected a noise complaint. Instead, it was the mayor, screaming, "Ray, get off the course right now. There are news choppers over your station. The DEA just raided your precinct. Dutcher's club hit the grass." "The DEA? Did they serve a warrant?" "One of your officers arrested the administrator of the DEA in his own driveway this morning. Cuffed him. Threw him in a cell. Get down there before the Justice Department dissolves. This whole department." The drive that normally took 20 minutes took Dutcher 9. He ran every light. When he turned onto the street, his stomach dropped. The road was barricaded with black federal SUVs, agents holding a perimeter against a swelling crowd, and 3 separate news helicopters circling overhead. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Lang stood near the booking desk, phone pressed to his ear. Anand leaned over the counter, glaring at Cole. "Who's in charge here?" Anand barked as Dutcher stumbled in. "I am. Chief Raymond Dutcher." He looked around wildly. "Where's the administrator I need to apologize personally?" "He's already left." Lang said, snapping his phone shut. He has no interest in your apology. Chief, he's interested in accountability. As of right now, your department is under a full federal microscope. In the corner, stripped of badge and weapon. Kessler sat with his head in his hands. Cobb stood nearby, hollow-eyed. What exactly happened? Dutcher demanded, staring at Cole. Kessler grabbed a guy outside a house on Ashworth Row, said he fit a profile, cuffed him before running the name. He was watering the flowers. Chief. Dutcher felt the floor tilt beneath him, the lawsuits, the headlines, the career-ending fallout. He rounded on Kessler. Stand up. Kessler Rose. Tears streaming down his face. Chief. He wouldn't show ID. I swear you're stripped of all police powers. Suspended without pay, pending termination. Dutcher's voice cracked with fury. The union won't be an issue. Lang said coldly, nodding to two agents. Officer Wade Kessler. You're under arrest for violation of Title 18. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Also charged with federal kidnapping and battery of a federal official. No, wait. I'm a cop. You can't, not anymore. Anand said, snapping cuffs onto his wrists. Put him in cell 5. Same bench he put the administrator on. Kessler sobbed as they marched him down the hallway. The bars slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the building. 3 days later, the precinct lobby had transformed into a federal command. Post desks pushed together, laptops humming, case files stacked in towers. A specialized Inspector General investigative team, led by Agent Delia Marsh, had descended on Brentwood Hills. Marsh was methodical, unhurried, and terrifyingly thorough. She didn't need to dig deep to find the rot. Terrence's directive had been simple: audit every arrest Kessler had ever made. And every supervisor who'd signed off on his paperwork. Marsh sat across from Officer Nate Cobb in a cramped interview room, a thick folder resting beneath her folded hands. Cobb had already surrendered his badge, desperate for an immunity deal to save his pension. Officer Cobb, Marsh began. We've reviewed 3 years of Kessler's arrest records. His rate of cash seizures during traffic stops is extraordinarily high. Cobb swallowed hard. Wade was aggressive. He targeted certain drivers, nice car in the wrong part of town. He'd pull them over for a busted taillight. Claim he smelled something to get a search. And during those searches, he'd use civil forfeiture. Say the cash was drug money. Even without a conviction. Told people if they fought it. He'd hit them with distribution charges. Most just walked away. Marsh slid a photograph across the table. Here's where the math stops working. Officer Cobb. Property logs show Kessler seized over $340,000 over 3 years. Our forensic accountants traced only $65,000 actually deposited into the department's forfeiture account. Cobb's eyes went wide. Wait, what are you saying? I'm saying Wade Kessler wasn't just a prejudiced cop with a badge. He was a thief. He fabricated probable cause, robbed innocent people, and pocketed the difference. And Sergeant Cole was signing off on the redacted reports. The revelation hit the precinct like a second explosion. The wrongful arrest of a federal administrator hadn't just been a catastrophic mistake, it had been an attempted shakedown. Kessler had seen a black man outside an expensive house and assumed he was either carrying illicit cash or too intimidated to fight back. He'd tried his usual playbook on the single worst possible target in the country. At the federal detention center in Nashville, the walls were closing in fast. Marsh walked into the windowless interview room, carrying a fresh stack of indictments. Kessler sat in an orange jumpsuit, hollow-eyed, a shadow of the man who'd strutted up a driveway 3 months earlier. Agent Marsh. He croaked. My lawyer thinks we can work a plea on the civil rights charge. I'll resign. Never work in law enforcement again. I just want to avoid federal prison. Marsh sat down without expression. Mr. Kessler, the civil rights charge is the least of your problems. What do you mean? We traced the account you opened in Turks and Caicos. We found the $118,000 stuffed inside a hollowed-out generator in your garage. We have sworn statements from 11 different victims you illegally detained and robbed under threat of fabricated charges. Kessler stopped breathing. You thought a badge made you untouchable. Marsh continued. You targeted people you assumed couldn't fight back. Then you got greedy. Walked up a driveway on Ashworth Row and tried your extortion game on Terence Okafor. I didn't know. Kessler whispered. I know you didn't. Marsh said, standing. That's exactly why Karma found you with such precision. We're amending your charges. You're no longer facing a single civil rights violation. You're facing 11 counts of extortion under color of official right, grand larceny, wire fraud, and federal racketeering. Kessler gripped the edge of the table. Hyperventilating. Racketeering, that's for the mob. You ran a criminal enterprise out of a patrol car. Marsh said flatly, gathering her folder. Maximum penalty on the combined charges is roughly 100 years. There will be no plea deal. The Department of Justice intends to make an example of you. She walked to the door, then paused, glancing back at him, sobbing into his sleeves. The administrator sends his regards. He suggested I remind you to check your pension where you're headed. You won't be needing it. The door slammed shut behind her. 5 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Nashville was surrounded by news vans stretching for blocks. The trial of R. Kessler, a Grassler, had become a glaring case study in the abuse of power and the unforgiving speed of federal justice. Inside the oak-paneled courtroom, Kessler sat at the defense table, drowning in an ill-fitting grey suit. His face gaunt, eyes darting nervously around the gallery. His public defender shuffled papers with the resigned posture of a man who knew there was no strategy left. Lead prosecutor Naomi Fitch stood before the jury, her voice steady and unwavering. Over 3 days she had paraded 11 of Kessler's victims to the stand. A nurse, a schoolteacher, a delivery driver, each describing eerily similar stories of being pulled over, threatened, and robbed by the man sworn to protect them. Then, the prosecution called its final witness. A hush fell over the gallery as Terence Okafor walked through the courtroom doors in a charcoal suit. His posture immaculate, radiating the quiet authority of his office. He didn't glance at Kessler as he took the stand and swore his oath. Administrator Okafor. Fitch began. Could you walk the court through the events of that morning at your residence? Terence spoke with clinical precision, no anger, no theatrics. He laid out the facts, the absence of probable cause, the immediate use of force, the refusal to verify identity, the assumption that had driven the entire encounter. Did the defendant ever ask your name before placing you in handcuffs? He did not, Terence said, his voice filling the room. He acted entirely on an assumption formed by my race and my clothing in an affluent neighborhood. He bypassed every safeguard meant to protect the people he was sworn to serve. Kessler stared at the table, his face burning with shame. And when you arrived at the precinct, did anyone attempt to correct the situation? Terence's gaze drifted to the gallery. Where former Sergeant Cole sat, she'd accepted a plea deal for accessory to extortion, testifying in exchange for a reduced 5-year sentence. The environment at that precinct was one of complicity. Terence said, the defendant operated with impunity because the culture around him allowed it. He believed the badge was a shield against consequence. He was wrong. The defense didn't even attempt cross-examination. Questioning a DEA administrator on federal procedure would have been professional suicide. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, guilty. On 11 counts of extortion under color of official right, guilty. On the charge of federal racketeering guilty, Kessler collapsed into his chair, sobbing quietly. As gasps rippled through the gallery, Judge Constance Ubel looked down from the bench, her expression carved from stone. Mr. Kessler, you were entrusted with the authority of the state, a badge and a gun, to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you built a criminal enterprise preying on the very citizens you swore to serve. You targeted the administrator of the DEA out of nothing but prejudice and arrogance. And in doing so, you finally exposed your own extortion scheme to the light. She lifted the gavel. This court sentences you to 52 years in a federal penitentiary, without possibility of parole. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals. The gavel fell like a gunshot. Marshals moved in, chaining Kessler's wrists and waist as he was dragged sobbing toward the side door. He looked back once. Terence stood in the front row, face indriadable, watching the machinery of justice do exactly what it was built to do. A week later, a quiet morning returned to Ashworth Row. Terence stood at the edge of his driveway in his flannel shirt and cargo shorts, hose in hand, water soaking into the soil of his hydrangeas. The street was calm, safe, ordinary again. A new patrol cruiser rolled slowly past, driven by a young officer from the newly restructured precinct. The window rolled down. Morning. Mr. Okafor. The officer called, warm and respectful. Beautiful day for the garden. Terence smiled, genuine, unguarded. Morning. Officer. It certainly is. Keep up the good work out there. The cruiser rolled on. Terence turned back to his flowers, the water running clear over the roots. The system was still broken in more places than he could count. But piece by piece, he knew it could be fixed. The storm had passed, and once again, the garden was quiet.